What's up, everybody? This is part 2 of my 4-part series of tearing down and rebuilding an iPhone 8 Plus. In the previous video, I mentioned that I paid $150 for this iPhone 8 Plus, and the objective is to put it back together with new housing, new screen, and have it be completely functional. We did the screen on the last video. Today we're going to be disassembling all the internal components and getting them ready to transfer over to a new housing. We're going to start in the top left corner with the Wi-Fi antenna and disconnecting the volume up, down, and vibrate switch cable. There are 4 screws up here at the top for the Wi-Fi antenna. Pop those 4 screws out and remove the Wi-Fi antenna. Once you get these screws out and get that Wi-Fi antenna out, there's a little metal piece that comes out as well. It's got 2 screws of its own, and then an anchor screw that you want to remove from the iPhone 8 Plus. And again, I harp on, make sure you keep a pattern of where your screws and components go. You don't want to play a guessing game when it comes to putting your screws back into place when it's time to reassemble. I like putting together puzzles, but I like to know exactly how I'm going to put it back together and have a game plan, not just throw everything in a pile and hope for the best. Now, this little metal piece here is very small and it's easy to lose, so make sure you hold on to that and put it where you know exactly where it's going to go when it comes time to reassemble the phone. The next step is to remove the rear camera. There's a connector here that covers your rear camera connectors. There are 2 connectors on the rear camera instead of just 1 in the older models. Be very careful because those connectors have cables connected to them that are very, very paper thin. So you don't want to damage those in any way. But once you get this metal shield off, it will show you those connectors. I usually use either my fingernail or a spudger to pop those up. They come off relatively easy, but you don't want to use your fingernail as little as possible to tear your fingernail up. There are 2 screws holding down the metal plate for the rear camera. One of those screws is a Phillips screw, and one of them is a flathead screw. It's an anchor screw that holds your board down, or excuse me, holds your camera down. The anchor screws can be used to hold the board down as well. You'll see a lot of those inside the phone as we get further on in the process. But right now, let's focus on this rear camera. This little anchor screw here will come out. Anchor screws are not the easiest to come out. You got to be very careful with those. They got to be straight or they won't go in or out very easy. This little metal plate will come off. You've already got the rear camera unconnected from the phone. Be careful pulling those out. That camera costs about $70 if you have to replace it. That's more than twice what the screen costs, so be careful with it. There's a little ribbon cable up here, top right corner. Kind of curves around the rear camera. You do have to take the rear camera out before you can remove this component. There are 2 screws holding that down. One of those screws is an anchor screw, and it does hold the board in place. Before you can pull your motherboard, you do have to remove all anchor screws. This is one of them. We already removed one that was underneath the Wi-Fi antenna. I always take my time with those anchor screws. If you do this process yourself, you'll understand why. That ribbon comes off. This is the camera flash, I believe. There are 2 screws here. One of them does act as an anchor screw for the board, and one of them mounts the camera flash to the top of the housing. Be very careful pulling this off. You don't want your flashlight or your camera flash not to work when it comes time to put this phone back together. 2 screws here. I just usually use a flat blade, get underneath the adhesive and cut the adhesive away. But that flat blade can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because you can just slice right through that ribbon cable. And that little piece will pop right up. Be gentle with it. You could use a spudger here as well. I like to live on the edge a little bit, I guess, and I use a flat blade where other people would say that I'm crazy. That's just me. Pop that SIM tray out before you try to pull the board. It will hold the board in place and you can damage the SIM reader if you're not careful. This is a connector for the charge port, the wireless charger, and the loudspeaker. Want to make sure you're careful with these connections. There's another anchor screw holding that board in place. Once you get these screws out, the board will pop right out. One more anchor screw. And out comes the board. You do have to pull the board before you can pull the charge port. The charge port sits underneath the board and wraps around and connects to it. So you do want to make sure you get the board out before you try to mess with the charge port. And at this part of the video is where I need to apologize for my amateur camera skills. I did not realize until after I was trying to edit these videos that a lot of this charge port work was done out of frame, and I do apologize for that. I did learn my lesson on that. Rookie mistakes. So in essence of saving time and not forcing you to watch a video where you can't see what's going on anyway, I sped this part up. Charge port can be complicated, but it can also be fun. I mean, I like doing this sort of stuff, so it's fun to me. But you have a lot of screws here that have to be patterned out exactly because they're not all the same size. I've said that before. And the stuff is going to have to go back together if you want it to function properly. It's got to go in the right place. There's the vibrate motor. It has a connector and screws. Pull that out. There's two screws on the left and an anchor screw on the right and a connector. What I'm doing here, and you can't really see it, is I'm cutting through the adhesive that holds the microphone to the filters. I call them filters, but they're these grills at the bottom to keep dust and water out of your phone. There's adhesive that sticks your microphones to those grills, and I was cutting away that stuff there. Wish I could go back and get that camera angled right. Next video. Well, not next video, because the next video is a reassembly, but the camera angles should be better in that video. This is the charge port pulled out of the device. You got to be very careful pulling out these charge ports. I usually use heat. I use a heating mat to pull that charge port out, but you don't want to tear it. Absolutely don't want to tear it. In that next video, we'll be putting this thing back together, putting that puzzle back together. That's my favorite part. If you like the video, press that like button. Thank you guys for watching.